Good morning, everybody. We had quite an early start. We got up about 4 a.m. to do this multi-hour hike, but now we're here standing in front of a beautiful waterfall with Fitzroy behind it. As early as we left and started, we also weren't the first people on the scene. There was already a group of about 12 people here all set up. But with an area like this, it's really nice. We have some low areas of the rocks, some high areas. So we can actually get a lot of photographers here all working together to be able to get the shot and not get in anybody else's frame. Right now, we're minutes away from the sunrise. Truth be told, when I first arrived here, there were still some stars in the sky. I did some exposures, some longer exposures just at f4. And at that point, we could see a piece of the mountain. I really liked the way that it looked. There was a star in the sky. But now, as the sun is almost rising, I'm not sure if we're going to get any refracted light on the mountains themselves. It looks like it's kind of clouded up behind us. But the mountain keeps looking like it's going to come out of these clouds. Like every single time I think it's going to reveal itself, it's like almost clouds cover little pieces, and then it's almost again. And see, even now, as I've been talking, it was obscured by the clouds, but it looks like those peaks are finally going to reveal themselves. This waterfall has a lot of water because we've had a lot of rain here over the last few weeks. There's been a lot of snow melt. So the water level and the rapids here are much more intense than they usually are. It's almost like a torrent of water coming through. Unfortunately, we're a little late for the fall colors, but that's a great opportunity because in post-processing, I can show you guys how to get those colors back even if the trees are dead. So this has been a great decision. Now, even if the clouds reveal the mountains, they leave, and we have the beautiful mountains, even if there's no light, I still feel like this can be a beautiful shot. What would be icing on the cake, though, is if the clouds finally go away, we're able to finally see Fitzroy, and the sky opens up and we get lights on the mountain. That would be best case scenario. But right now we're looking at getting 2 things that we want out of 3. Visible or mostly visible mountains and a beautiful scene with mild weather. So even without light, this still has potential of being a beautiful shot. This was the first shot that I took this morning when we arrived. As soon as we arrived, I just wanted to kind of get an idea of the scene, and I could already see that it had potential. In fact, if we look at this, it's actually a nice night shot. We can almost see the tips of the mountains, even though they're obscured in clouds. We can still see some of the stars, and it makes it a very interesting shot. As the morning progressed a little bit into the blue hour, I switched it back to f8, and it was nice because I'm naturally getting 5-second exposures or 10-second exposures, so the water's already smooth. Now that the sun is about to rise, I've gone up to f11 so I can naturally get a 1/4 second exposure for the water. A 1/4 second exposure is more than enough to smooth out this water because it's moving so fast. I don't need anything on the front of my lens. I don't need any neutral density filters in order to achieve the soft water effect. In fact, if the light does come out and the mountains get really hot, I can even, with this camera, the GFX 50S and this lens, go all the way up to f32. If I need to smooth out the water and it becomes very bright, I'll shoot my brackets, then I'll come back with an f32 exposure just to soften the water. Later in post-processing, we'll use the soft part of the water so we avoid the diffraction from f32. That way we can combine the best part of the exposures for the background and the soft water itself. So the sun's already up, it's hidden behind the clouds. This is the composition that I've just settled on, but I have not been shooting the same composition the whole time. Basically, as the sky's been changing, as everything's been changing, I've been changing my composition from portrait to landscape mode, but also various levels of zoom. So right now, this frame represents everything. If the sky lights up a little bit more, if the mountains show up, the waterfall, everything is in frame and at a nice composition. So right now, it's just a waiting game. We have to find out if the sun's going to shine through those clouds, if it's going to illuminate those spires, and if those spires are actually going to reveal themselves. So I'm going to sit here, camp out here for a little bit longer, shoot through these variations, make sure to give thought to if I change my composition and I reshoot the brackets, also make sure that I shoot another set or another exposure just for the water itself. Well, it's been a few hours now. The sun's been up for a while. Unfortunately, that side of the sky, you can actually see where the sun's over the hill here. It's completely clouded over. So we never got much direct light on the peaks, but there is some really nice ambient light. The other thing is, the peaks never fully revealed themselves, but they mostly revealed themselves. So I'm going to call this shot mostly a win. Now, I left towards the end the camera in the same composition because I started seeing little bits of the mountain, and I was worried that the second I moved the camera, you know, the whole thing's going to reveal. So I decided to leave it in the same position because I'm kind of curious at this point. What I've seen may look different when I get it on screen. So when I'm concerned about just these little bits of the mountains coming out, I may have captured something that looks just as beautiful. In addition to that, there may be a way to combine pieces of these exposures together. So maybe it's not the normal blending of time that I'm usually doing, which is blending like a blue hour with a sunrise or a blue hour with a sunset of ambient and artificial light together. But maybe in this case, there's a way to bring in some of the parts of the mountain. Maybe I can remove parts of the cloud where the mountain was clear and get more than I could get with a single frame. That's why I really ended up leaving the camera in one place in this medium composition. So when we had a look at that reference frame, you might have thought, well, there's a lot of sky there. Well, I did that for a few reasons. It was one, just in case the sky lit up, and two, I have plenty of skies from other scenes that would look really nice up there. So I don't have to add epic color and light, but once I'm done picking either the best single exposure of the mountains or combining multiple ones together to reveal different bits of the mountain, I may actually go back a little bit forward in time, or even from another shot that I've captured here in Patagonia and add just a little bit more texture on the top of the sky. Overall, this scene's been really interesting, but I'm really happy to say that I think we have a nice shot to work with, and we can overcome some of the obstacles that we have, like the lack of the total fall colors here in post-processing. So the next time I see you guys, we'll be in the studio, and we're going to be piecing all of this back together. Hello everybody, welcome back to the post-processing studio. Today we're going to be working on the files from the hidden waterfall in El Chaltén. Now this was very frustrating because the mountain never fully revealed itself. So what we're going to do is piece together the mountains from a couple different exposures. Then ultimately we're going to bring in a little bit of highlights that actually came across the mountains. And we're going to address sort of revitalizing some of the fall colors around some of the dead foliage. So let's begin. Let's take a look at Lightroom really quick and I'll show you what I have for you guys in this lesson file. This is going to be our base exposure. You can see it's pretty flat and we have most of the mountains. Out of all of the shooting, these were the two shots where the mountains were the clearest. So you can see that we have Fitzroy here is kind of revealed, and then these other spires right here, you can see that they're revealed and Fitzroy goes away. So Fitzroy actually creates its own cloud, which is why they call it the Smoking Mountain, and it tended to cover it up nearly the entire time we were shooting. So we have these two mountain layers to piece together. Then ultimately what we'll do is we'll come in here and add some of these highlights back in. The reason I'm not using this as the base exposure, you can see that it was later in the morning when the sun was already up, and I don't have the soft streaks of water because this is a 1/25 second exposure. The base is actually 1/6, if I'm reading that correctly. So just enough time to get that soft water. So we'll start with this as a base, work with these, and then ultimately bring in these highlights. Before we get started with the editing, let me go ahead and export this so we can bring it into Photoshop and build our initial PSD with the straight out of camera raw file. We'll name this Original Raw and head back to Lightroom. First thing, scroll down, of course, we've got to get rid of the sharpening. We're going to leave this in the Adobe Color Profile. Let's warm this up a little bit, somewhere around 8,000. We'll round this number out to 10 instead of 11, and let's change this to 0.75, so 3/4 of a stop. And the highlights, we'll reverse that direction, -75. Pull the shadows up just a little bit, make that 50, and also the blacks around 5. And let's add some vibrance, maybe 10. Now let's make a selection for the sky, and I just made it much worse, obviously, so let's bring that down, -0.25. Let's go ahead and bring the highlights down a little bit. Let's bring the shadows up just a little bit. And let's go to the dehaze and add some drama in that sky, just like that. Close this panel out. Now I just want to take a look. If I increase the vibrance It actually is holding up all the way to about 40, so let's just be a little bit more subtle. Rather than 10, I'm going to go to 15 and add a little bit more. We're going to take this, right-click, Develop Settings, Copy Settings, make sure Check All is selected, Copy, and let's just go ahead and apply it to these two images with a paste. Select all three, export with previous, and we'll use unique names. Let's start with the adjusted raw. Select all, copy, close, and we'll paste this in. We'll take the one where we can actually see the tip of Fitzroy there, select all, copy, and we'll paste this on top. Last one, select all, copy, close, paste. Let's name these. So this is going to be adjusted raw. Call this mountain, spell that correctly, 1, and mountain 2. All right, so these are shot at different points in the morning. I think they're about 20 minutes apart. So the lighting didn't change that much because it was a giant softbox with the overcast sky. So what we have to do is just figure out the best way to just bring those specific little areas of the mountains on top of our adjusted background. And we're going to do that with some luminosity masking. So remember, when we're creating our channels or luminosity masks, they're all contextual. In other words, they change based on what's selected here. So if I want to create a luminosity mask to control the mountain layer for mountain 1, then mountain 2 has to be disabled. Whatever is visible in my layers palette is going to be replicated in the channel palette. So let's start by creating a mask for this. So with that active, we'll command click, load it as a selection, and create a new mask. And we'll take a look at this. Also deselect. By default, it's a selection for the highlights. Let's go ahead and invert it. So we'll call this mountain 1. We'll go ahead and select this, put it on a folder, apply the mask, and move the mountain 1 layer and name it, you guessed it, mountain 1. So basically what's happening now, and if I zoom in, we can take a look at this. Since this is the mask, and you can see that some of that mountain is visible, it's actually throwing this layer on top, specifically in these areas, and also all over the rest of the image, which we actually don't want. So this looks good so far, but I'm going to increase it just a little bit. I'm going to do that by actually clamping the values, Command M for curves, and I'm actually going to clamp in on these values. As I clamp the left side with the white, you can see that it's revealing more and more of those mountains, but also more and more of the background itself. And I actually want those clouds around it. So here's what we're actually going to do. Let's go ahead and take a look so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. If I do it now, Command M on the curves, and I clamp this, you can see it's increasing the white. So let's go ahead and do that about 25% into that quarter tone, and we'll go ahead and clamp that out a little bit as well. So something that looks just like that, and I'll apply it. So now if I turn this on and off, you can see I'm getting the mountain. But I don't want the rest of the image, just these few mountains, just this part right here. So what I'm going to do is Option click the Create New Mask button, and I'm going to mask that out. With the paintbrush B on the keyboard, I'm actually going to custom paint in just the area that I want. And in this case, it's just this area around the mountain. And also we'll go ahead and bring in some of the spire as well. Perfect. So that is going to just overlay that right on top, and the pixels match, the camera didn't move, and I'm just going to have to clean up the edges around it just a little bit. And we'll just take a look at this before and after. So the mountain's still kind of peeking in and out of the cloud. If I shift click this, you can see the difference. And the reason that I'm using the luminosity mask is this is really tough because you can see those halos there that are generated when I disable this, and that's because the sky is completely different. So in this case, what I'm actually trying to do is just reveal in portions part of this image on top. Make it really easy here. And with that luminosity mask, that means that I can go over the edges and I won't get many halos. That looks good so far. That's mountain 1. Let's turn on mountain 2. We'll go ahead and to the channels, Command click, we'll create this, and I'll deselect. We'll take a look at this. We'll call it mountain 2. and I'll invert it so it shadows. Load it as a selection, create a new folder, apply the mask, name it Mountain 2, and move the layer inside. And we'll toggle this on and off real quick, and you can see we reveal even more of the mountains. So specifically, this area and this area. Same thing though, what I want to do is go ahead and option click it to reveal it, Command M for curves, and we're going to do the same thing here. So we're going to remove the sky, and we're going to bring in the mountains themselves, just like that. So a little bit of clamping. We'll go ahead and option click the create new mask button, and I'll just go ahead and disable that so we can take a look one more time what we're about to do. Looks pretty good. And let's go ahead and reveal it just with the brush. So here, let's just go ahead and reveal a little bit more of this spire here, a little bit more of this mountain, especially down here, this side. Perfect. Also this guy right here, a little bit more of that one. Nice. Let's go ahead and reveal those mountains a little bit more. So, if the weather beats you, hopefully you just had enough layers to put it all back together. Okay, so we'll take a look at these. I'm going to save this in the background when we take a look at these. We have Mountains 1 and Mountains 2. All right, that's starting to look pretty nice. And there's not much overlap on the edges, not much haloing, but let's go ahead and zoom in on the tip of this mountain, and I just want to go ahead and take a look at this one more time. So you can see that we can kind of see it, kind of see the tip of the mountain, but when I actually reveal it, we're not actually seeing it. So what I can actually do is I can, let's just double check here, disable, enable, yeah. Let's go ahead and go into here, and what I can actually do is increase the contrast of this a little bit more. And I can reveal this simply by using the brush tool here, brushing in some white right on top of here. So if we go back to the image, you can see if I brush the white in, you can see it's revealing the mountaintop. So we just see the tip of the mountain coming out of that fog. That looks pretty good. So that's about as good as it's gonna get, to be honest. That's as revealed as the mountains actually became. And I can just go ahead and brush some white on this as well. And you can see what that looks like. It's not pretty, but it certainly does the trick. So from here to here and then here to here, we're actually revealing different pieces of the mountains. Let's go back to Lightroom and paste the settings to this image as well. So develop, paste, and take a look, and it's way too warm. It's completely different time of day. So let's go ahead and take this from 8,000 to 6,000. We'll take a look back and forth. Pretty close, a little warmer, but we also have lighting. So lighting is influencing those warm tones. Let's go ahead and export this with previous as well. In Photoshop, select all, copy, close, and we'll select the top layer here, paste on top. We'll call this lighting. All right, so now let's take a look at this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, toggle it on and off. So first of all, you can see that the light changes just a little bit, and I get nice warm light here. I get nice light on the mountains. If I back this up a little bit and show the bottom of the image though, I prefer the base layer to this one. I just feel like the base one has better lighting. See how it feels like this is a little bit more chiseled, a little bit more warm. This layer, I'm not really happy with the white balance overall. But you can also tell, if I zoom in here, pay attention to these rocks. This moved. Now remember, this is a really windy area. So even if it moves a pixel, it's not going to line up the way that we want it. Let's go ahead and do this one manually. Let's just go ahead and set this to difference. And let's take a look at how much it actually moved. If I move and toggle it with the keys here, didn't move that much, just actually about a pixel. In fact, it's interesting that now that I look at it, it doesn't feel like it's moved much at all. But let's go ahead and zoom in just to be sure. And I'm just going to nudge it a little bit and down just a little bit. Let's zoom in a little bit further. We really want those mountains to be intact. And it looks like it's basically just 1 pixel down and 1 pixel to the right, and you can see that most of those lines disappear. Let's go ahead and change this back to normal. I'll go ahead and zoom out. create a new mask. And with the gradient, let's just say that we'll want the lighting to basically end at the top of the mountain. So from here to here. And I'm going to have to make that a little bit more drastic just because we're getting some of that sky. From here to here. I'm also going to brush out just a little tiny bit on the top and on this edge so that we can get it seamless. It looks pretty good. A little bit more, just like that. So we get the lighting here, soft lighting here. But now I don't want the rest of this. I don't want the bottom of the image. So what I'm actually going to do is display this with Option click. And with the gradient tool, I'm going to set the mode to multiply. And when I actually do that, from white to black, it'll multiply this right on top so that I can isolate this even more. So here on the layer, I only want it to be from here to here. So now we basically just have this strip of lighting right on this image. And I'm actually going to go a little bit further than that and paint it out right here. So we only have it on these, what's left of these fall colors, and the background. That looks pretty good. Now I also want to go in and just make sure that I like the way this mountain looks. I think that I kind of overdid it when I painted on this mask. So what I'm actually going to do is mask a little bit of it out. Very, very slightly. Mask some of this out. So with the flow set to really light, let's go ahead and mask that out just so that it basically doesn't have that contrast or a little bit of halo around the edge. That looks pretty good. Let's take a look at everything here and Shift Option Command E to create a new layer of all. Let's go into Adobe Camera Raw Filter and unify this all together. Exposure needs to come up a little bit. That's the first thing. That looks pretty good. We'll compensate for the highlights a little bit by pulling those down. Let's go 15 in the whites, and let's add some dehaze and some vibrance. I know this is a simple one, and we'll say OK. Before and after, slight change, just kind of bringing everything back to normality so that we can further edit the result. At this point, we've pieced together what we could of the mountains themselves, started to unify this as a more finished composition, but now I want to address something kind of annoying. It's that we missed the fall colors. We didn't miss them all, but you can see here at the top we have some fall colors. If we zoom in, you can see there's a lot of foliage still here, but truth be told, they had weeks of wind and rain, which is not uncommon to Patagonia, obviously, but it also decimated the fall colors. I don't know if it decimated them a little bit early, but it left us in a situation where we have a lot of dead trees. And we have dead trees here on the right. Now notice something here. Obviously, these look great. These fall colors are wonderful, but they're, kind of by themselves. You can still see some of the color. So we can still see some of the orange, some of the green, some of the yellows, and all those tones. So while we can't actually magically just create fall colors unless we shot references at these types of perspective to try to paint those in, but what we can do is at least change the color and the tone surrounding the fall colors to warm it up and make it feel like it's a little bit more variable than just the dead trees. So we'll start by creating a folder called Fall Colors. And what I'm going to do is create a series of photo filters, starting with a warming filter. I like to use the 81 at 50%. And we're going to paint these back in. So I'm going to call this Warm 50. So we know how much it was. Let's go ahead and black out that mask. And what I'm actually going to do is start painting this in. So with the brush tool, let's go ahead and start painting this in, maybe about 20% flow. And I'm actually just going to start painting this color right back in. And as you can see really quickly, we're not magically revealing prime and peak fall colors. But what we are doing is adding a little bit more color. So it breaks up the monotony of the dead trees, and it just kind of helps blend this into the fall colors themselves. Now this is quite an aggressive filter. In other words, I have it up to 50%. So you can see as I turn this off and then on, we're starting to get this back in. So we'll just go ahead and paint in these areas, maybe some more warmth up top here, and then anywhere else we think we need it. Definitely all around here. So what I'm going to do, larger brush, let's just go ahead and paint this in just to warm these up. And we already had some color there, so this isn't going to look unrealistic. It's just going to look like there's still warm tones on the trees. And after the fall foliage, oftentimes it still retains some of that brown or golden color. Same thing here, just go ahead and warm that up, warm up these pixels. Just like that. We'll go back here. Now obviously this does take a little bit of time. When you are building this at home by yourself, definitely take the time to sort of work around these edges. It's also largely an artistic endeavor here because we're actually just painting these colors in. First one, warm 50. Let's create another one. We'll go with a deep red. We'll leave it at 25. We'll call this red 25. Black this one out. Black this one out. And same thing here, we'll just go ahead and brush some of the more intense red in certain areas only. So I just want this to be around some of the natural red tones that are already there. Same thing here, we had some red. Let's just go ahead and bring some red back in. This is a little bit more subtle. It's around that foliage itself. Up here, some of the red. Along here, just a little bit. Down here. This one, you don't go too crazy with. Just sort of add it in certain areas. So the warm looks pretty good. Let's add one more. Let's call this green as well. We'll name it green 25. And I'll just invert this, Command-I really quick. And this one I'll zoom in a little bit more. And we'll brush some of the green tones back in now. Green's kind of nice because it just pops those colors. Here, for example, this moss, we can really pop those colors out. Perfect. Over here. Down here especially. Nice green tones. Green tones. Look, we have a little bit of fall colors right there, and nothing else left. Pull these greens out, these greens, and now just sparsely around here, we'll just separate some of these tones where there was some grass, natural green tones here, up here, all around. Let's go back to the warm filter. Let's cover this a little bit more thoroughly on those areas. And we'll go ahead and zoom out, make sure we're not forgetting any of the image. It looks pretty good. Looks like I missed some of this over here and up here. Around here, and we'll take some more of that red and put the red right on that. Let's make that so intense. The last bit of fall foliage down there on the right side of the frame. And add a little bit more green. Perfect. Now that we've done our best to re-accentuate those fall colors where the leaves were missing, let's go to the channels and we're going to create some more contrast in this image using luminosity masks. But if we go up here to our actions panel, we've already created the Create Luminosity Masks 1 action. Let's go ahead and play that so we get our 3 masks. Highlights, shadows, and midtones. But what I actually want to do is create another action, and that action is going to take all 3 of these masks and create folders for them inside of the Layers palette. So let's walk through that entire process. First thing is we need to create a new one. We're going to call this Apply Luminosity Masks 1. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Enter. When I hit Enter, it's going to start recording. So what we're going to do here is we'll start with highlights. We'll Command-click Highlights, go to the Layers, create a new folder, apply it, call it Highlights 1. Go back to the Channels, select Shadows, go back to the Layers, create a new folder, a mask, we'll call this Shadows 1. One more time, we'll go back to the Channels, select the midtones, click through this, Layers, new folder, new mask. We'll name this Midtones. Perfect. Now I'm going to stop recording this. And I'm also going to take these 3 that we just created, and we're going to throw them in the trash. We'll just delete them really quickly here, go back to the channels, And what I actually want to do is pack this up and let's see if it works. Now remember, you have to use this one first. So you have to first apply the Create Luminosity Masks 1, and then you have to use the Apply Luminosity Mask. This one depends on this one being in existence. So let's go ahead and play this and see if it works. So here we have highlights, shadows, and midtones already created. Let's hit play. Go to the layers, and just like that, all three of these folders are ready. But before I move on, let me just make this consistent, take that 0 out, just so it's normal. The other thing is I only want to focus on the midtones, so I can go ahead and delete the shadows and the highlights. But this is going to save us time later when we want to create and apply these luminosity masks for further color correction and adjustments. Two things I want to address here. Zoom out a little bit so we can see everything. First thing is the contrast. So I can go ahead and create a curves with a small wiggle here just to amplify the contrast of this image, just to make it really jump off the page. The other thing is the brightness of the foreground. So we'll call this contrast. Let's create another curves layer with a gamma boost. Looks good for the foreground. And we'll go ahead and use a gradient ramp so that that ends and doesn't affect any of the background image, so just in the foreground. So we'll call this gamma plus. That looks pretty good. So we have this to this, starting to bring all that together. Next step, what we can do is create, with an option click to the create new layer. Let's go ahead and create a dodge and burn. And in the mode, we'll set that to overlay and fill it with 50% gray. Now what I can do here too is I can further accentuate some of this detail, particularly if I go back in here and with a really low flow of like 2%, I can actually darken some of these areas of the waterfall. So you can see I can darken this area, darken some of these areas, darken some of the edges here. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can go back in by hitting X on the key, painting white. I can actually paint white on the waterfall as well. And this is going to give me a little bit more detail around the edges. So if we're going to create those tendrils of water, we might as well accentuate those tendrils as well, just like this. I'll have to give careful consideration not to blow these values out, obviously, but if we really paint in some dark, we can get away with quite a bit of detail adjustment here. Really in these main tendrils, these main ones here. Back here, probably. Yeah, back there. Perfect. So this looks pretty good. Definitely a start. Zoom out a little. And let's also do the rocks here. So we'll bring some lighting in on the rocks. More lighting in on the rocks. Perfect. Let's take a look at this other side. Down here, more detail on these rocks. Accentuate some of the light that's hitting those. And those really beautiful reflections that we have of the wet part of the rock. Perfect. All right, let's go ahead and zoom out and take a look at this image. Overall, this looks pretty good, but I'm just not that happy with the composition. Initially, I had hoped the sky did something interesting, so I left a lot of that, just in case the sky did do something interesting, which as you can see, it really didn't. So what we can do is crop this down, and we'll keep its original ratio, and what I can actually do is just hold Shift to unify this, so we'll keep the ratio and we'll just kind of crop some of this down. I can change the composition. These mountains we can go ahead and exclude. These mountains we can push more towards the center or offset, and then we also get rid of some of this dead area where we lost the fall colors. Then we have a nice compositional leading line if I change this a little bit more. And I can even pull this in just a hair like this, and really pay attention to the way this flows through the frame, just like this. So you see if we use the rule of thirds, these two lines, we have our mountains up here at the top of the subject. This line goes through, this line goes through, and this line goes through the bottom. So it's a nicer composition. We'll go ahead and apply it. The other thing is it got rid of some of the sky, which is boring. But at this point, I want to address something really important. This is a nice shot, but it's not a portfolio shot. It made a great lesson because we made it much better than it started. But the only way to really solve this shoot is a complete do-over. In other words, I'd have to hike up there again, wait for the sunrise, and hope for the best. And you never know how the weather is going to change or affect the shoot. So in this case, I might share something like this to Instagram. I might use it for a few things. But an image like this, unless I got the beautiful colors of the sunrise and the mountains fully visible, it wouldn't end up in my portfolio. But it's still a great exercise. And really, you got to try over and over again. And I think this spot is well worth it. Next time, I'd really hope that everything aligned for me, because I think it would be a fantastic shot for the portfolio. But let's go ahead and take a look at everything that we've done so far. Let's make that full screen. We'll go ahead and hide everything. We started straight out of camera, looked like this. So really dark in the foreground, kind of blown out in the background, really flat and boring. We adjusted the RAW to balance it, and then we brought those two mountains in, or what we could, adjusted the lighting, adjusted some color correction, then some final tweaking with dodging and burning. So while this is not a portfolio level piece, we were able to take it really far initially from here all the way to here. That wraps things up for this lesson. It's time to get out of the studio and back in the field.